Demonstrations against the South African government's strict apartheid policies flare into shocking violence. At Sharpsville, an industrial township, thousands gather outside a police station in protest against new laws requiring every African to carry a pass at all times. The crowd refused to disperse and began stoning the police, who opened fire into the crowd from behind a wire fence. In 2 days of demonstrations that began here, between 50 and 100 were killed and hundreds injured. Worldwide protests were raised, including a condemnation of the violence by the United States State Department. In South Africa, a mass work boycott by Africans is crippling industry in the area. An uneasy calm reigns. The conditions that led to the Sharpsville tragedy continue unchanged.
Hi, my name is Karen Peterson and I'm from Durban, South Africa.
We have a few questions for you today about your growing up in South Africa.
Okay.
As a child growing up in South Africa, were you aware of any racial segregation in your area?
No, I was not really aware of any segregation. I didn't see it.
Would you say your parents took action to hide you from any segregation taking place in your area?
No, I don't think my parents hid me from segregation. I think white people and black people in South Africa just lived in different areas, so I think it was the government that did it, not my parents.
You said that the government separated black and white neighborhoods. So did they also separate your schools?
Yes, I went to a white-only school and I assumed that there were black-only schools, but my school only had white children.
Did it bother you that no black children attended your school?
It didn't bother me because I really didn't know any different. If I had known different, it probably would have, but I didn't know.
Did it? As you grew older and moved up through the different levels of schooling in South Africa, did you become more aware of apartheid taking place all around you?
I did. When I went to college, I didn't really notice in high school because it was a white-only school. But when I went to college, I did realize that there was a discrepancy between the whites and the black students.
We have footage of many anti-apartheid protests taking place in many colleges throughout South Africa. Did you take place in any of these protests?
No, I never took place in any anti-apartheid protests.
Did you ever witness any events that had anything to do with the apartheid, anything at all?
No, I didn't really witness anything growing up, no.
When was the first time you heard the name Nelson Mandela?
I think I really heard Nelson Mandela's name for the first time when I was in high school.
What was your reaction when he was released from prison?
Well, very excited. When I heard his name when I was in high school, it did have the word terrorism around his name because that's what we were told is why he went to prison. But then as we did a little bit more research and heard more about him from people who were, trying to help get the blacks and whites together, then we realized that actually he was a very, very good man, and we were very excited when he was released from prison. But before that, I really didn't know. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have ways to do good research on who he was and what he believed in.
Were you excited or surprised when he was elected president?
I was very excited, and no, I was not surprised because he was the right man for the job.
Would you say he was elected as the first black president because of the overwhelming numbers of black residents allowed to vote for the first time?
I think that is why he became the president, because there was a lot of people who were able to vote for him, but I feel that there was a very large number of white people that voted for him because we knew that there wasn't a better way for South Africa to make the change that they did.
Would you say that there's any signs of apartheid left in South Africa?
I think that there probably are some signs of apartheid in South Africa. I was just there on vacation for 2 weeks, and I never witnessed any signs of apartheid. It was wonderful. The culture was very mixed. People were happy. There were black people and white people eating together, shopping together, married to each other, and it was actually wonderful because I hadn't been back in 8 years. So I'm sure that there is apartheid in some areas of the country, but not that I noticed.
Hoe gaan het? My naam is Edward Peterson. Ek was in Suid-Afrika gebore in 1996. My name's Edward Peterson. I was born in Johannesburg, South Africa in 1969.
As a child growing up in South Africa, were you aware of any racial segregation taking place in your area?
No, we were oblivious. We were just children. It was just the norm. It was what the world was like.
Would you say your parents took action to keep you hidden or isolated so you wouldn't see any segregation taking place?
No, we lived in a white suburb that was a normal South African suburb for the time, and we just had a normal household, which we perceived as normal at the time. We didn't realize it was segregated.
You said you lived in a white suburb. Does that mean your schools are also segregated?
Yes, all the children I went to that were students were in fact white. All the teaching staff was white. We did have some janitorial staff that were black.
Did you find it strange or offensive in any way that no black kids were attending school with you?
No, as I said, I think we were children. We didn't think about politics. It was the norm. It was that way everywhere. We didn't know any better. We didn't travel overseas. The newspapers were controlled by the state. There was no television when I was growing up. I was 12 years old before we even got television in South Africa. So you can't be offended by something that you don't know is wrong.
As you grew older and moved up in school, did you notice any more segregation taking place or just take more notice to it?
My schooling all the way through high school until I was 18 was in a segregated school, and I had no real political awareness all the way through school. Again, we didn't really read the newspapers, and if we did, they were controlled by the state media. We did start having television, but I went to boarding school, so we never watched any television. I was just really oblivious to segregation and the anti-apartheid movement, and at school it took me getting to university where I became very quickly aware of the situation and how South Africa was the pariah of the world and how our system of segregation or apartheid was incredibly wrong.
Did you take place in any protests against apartheid while attending university?
I initially started going to Rand Afrikaans University, which was a very conservative university. I didn't enjoy it, and I transitioned after about 2 months to the University of the Witwatersrand, which was the biggest university in the Southern Hemisphere at the time. And it was a very politically active university. In fact, it was the university where Winnie Mandela did most of her work in the anti-apartheid movement. So yes, I participated in many protest marches, but then again, the marches were massive, anywhere up to 20,000 people in one march.
Did they impact you in any positive or negative way?
Yes, massively. I think the protest movement at Wits University led the country in many respects. It brought to, it was highlighted in an extreme manner just how brutal the regime was. They were very violent. Many people were injured. In fact, people were killed. and it definitely hardened my resolve and many people's resolve against apartheid.
When was the first time you heard the name Nelson Mandela?
I was at school. We heard of his name, but it wasn't something we were educated about. We didn't get much insight into who the man was, or we were just told he was a terrorist.
Why did the teachers tell you that he was a terrorist? Like, what led them to say that?
Again, it's the teachers were also victims of what the state media put out. So the state media would script the textbooks that we would study from. They would control the newscast. There was only a state-run television station. The newspapers were for the most part controlled by the state. So even the adults in South Africa were sometimes blinded, and they didn't know the truth. So they were teaching us what they knew.
How do you feel about the state of South Africa today?
South Africa went through a tremendous transition. It's been 20 years since we've had one man, one vote. And while I am concerned about the country, I do remain optimistic about its prospects.